Yeti.
I love mouses.
How are you? Hope you're fine. It is the shiny show.
Okay, where you go?
Why have I got horns?
Oh no.
Oh, it's the Shiny Podcast.
Oh, there's going to be some drama ahead.
All I wanted was a pie.
And then I hatched out of an egg. Okay, bring the mic over. He's ready to record.
Is it metaphorical? Is it deep?
Your show's being so international.
Good boy. He's not all that shy, is he, right?
Blimey, Governor. It's the Shy Life Podcast.
Hello, Paul.
I don't know how he done it. 767.
Save
67. I think 2 sevens with a 6 in between.
767. Bonjour et bienvenue au podcast The Shy Life.
Hello.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Shy Life Podcast with me, Paul the Shy Yeti. How are you doing? I'm all right. So, what's this episode going to be about? Well, it's another music episode, and Martin Holmes is here.
Oh, hi, yes, with my vast musical knowledge. None.
Oh, no, that's not true. You know how to spell it. You know how to spell
I do.
You know just how to spell music and knowledge. What are we going to be talking about this time? Well, we're kind of wandering through the years and looking more the groups that were big, or even some of the ones that weren't big, and we've
Tiny
sort of
tiny leprechaun groups. The Smurfs, they were short.
Oh well, yes, we haven't mentioned the Smurfs, but who knows? Maybe I think we might have passed them now. I'm not sure. I think this time we're going to be discussing roughly around 1979. So we'll run the theme music, and when we come back,
More of a table wine.
Oh, I don't. That's a quote from a 1979 Doctor Who story. I think 1979 is pretty good. Right, let's run the theme music, and when we come back, we'll see what was going on.
Darling, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
My favorite person is me.
Keep it rolling. Keep it rolling.
Yes, but it's a positive thing, Paul. The highlight, the Shy Life.
Go Shy Yeti.
I'll go anyway, but potato.
Delicious.
Hello, Captain. How are you?
Oh my, have you ever found out my secret? What do you have?
I love the Yeti. That's my favorite thing.
If you thought that was bad, just listen to this.
Yeah, I'm strangely drawn to Yeti Uncle John's ankles as well.
I could eat my body weight in crisps.
Has anyone seen my hot sausage?
It's all gooey and meaty and yum, 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 yum.
It was enormous.
I don't think I'm ready to speak about it. It's been a while.
Here comes the grizzly.
It's the Shy Life Podcast.
I can't wait for it to begin.
Alright, I'm just being an alien. I like that.
Hi there.
Marvelous, Paul.
Oh, flipping back. No, nothing. Anything.
So yes, 1979. What were your? Do you have any memories of what you were?
Was I alive in 79?
Yes, you were. I was alive. I was alive in 79.
79 is weird, isn't it? It's kind of one of those years that you kind of know about, but then you sort of think, I can't think of anything specific about it, apart obviously from City of Death and Destiny.
Well, you're having things like Gary Newman and the Specials, Madness.
They already started by then, because I always think it's still punk, but of course it isn't, is it? Yes, these other bands have started coming along. I suppose Blondie might just
Blondie was quite big in 79. ABBA was still big in 79. Disco was still...
disco finally dying?
Well,
it It's interesting to me because I recently watched Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, which was made in 1979, apparently. At least the original pilot was. And there's a scene in it where he tries to, there's a dance scene and where Buck gets this guy who's got this organ, who's the DJ stroke organist or whatever in the episode, and he sort of sidles up to him and goes, give it a bit more beat and all, or whatever he says to him. And suddenly this person who, 500 years in the future knows exactly what he means by disco, and he starts disco dancing. I just think they really didn't see the death of disco in Rogers, did they? They didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I mean, I think things like
78 was Saturday Night Fever and Grease, wasn't it? So there were those two big John Travolta films were only a year old at that point, so it was still quite a huge.
And also, I mean, it might just be my own interest, but things like Voulez-Vous by ABBA, with Gimme, 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 and all that sort of stuff around that time. That's 79. So
well, I think we talked about the Gibb brothers, didn't we, last time? And that again, because they'd had all those hits on the back of Saturday Night Fever, and obviously the follow-up film a couple of years later, so they were still huge at that point. So it was, disco was probably alive and well and kicking and saying, "Get out, you punks! Put on some proper clothes."
We might come back to some of these groups, but I'll tell you some of the headlines, musical headlines of 1979. Eric Clapton marries Pattie Boyd, ex-wife of his pal George Harrison. Black Lace represented us in the Eurovision Song Contest and came seventh. Kate Bush began her first live tour, the Tour of Life, and it was her only tour that she ever did until she did her tour Before the Dawn in 2014.
Her only tour before the other one.
Yeah, for years it was her only tour. Elton John becomes the first overseas pop music artist to perform in Israel.
Wow.
The Who performed their first concert since Keith Moon died,
right?
With a new drummer. Led Zeppelin played their last ever British concert at Nebworth. And Cliff Richard achieved his 10th number one with We Don't Talk Anymore, but it's his first chart topper for 11 years.
Not that the theme tune to this little conversation we have. We could play that in, couldn't we?
Well,
only after we've finished, but it would be ironic. It'd be ironic because it's so funny because we keep talking every time. Wired for sound.
We have trouble with our singing, with Ig singing these days because of him being
he's a celebrity now, isn't he? We can't afford him, basically.
Well, he's also persona non grata a bit at this moment.
Shocked.
Well, no, it's a long story. It's a long story. Also, in August...
Calling Olsen. Come in, Olsen.
In August 1979, Brotherhood of Man, 2 members of Brotherhood of Man got married.
Right, to each other.
I imagine so. I hope so. Well,
Also, you could sense all that sexual tension, could you, throughout the years? See, there's somebody wanted to hang on to that mustache. Unless it, I mean, I don't know. Who would it? Was it the 2 women? Did they get married to each other, or?
No, it was
probably not in 1979. No,
it was Martin. It was Martin and Sandra. Martin and Sandra, whichever ones they are. Also, in November, Bill Haley and his Comets perform at the Drury Lane Theatre in London in a command performance for the Queen, and this was Haley's final recorded performance of Rock Around the Clock.
Wow.
singles in the UK. I'm not necessarily so interested in the actual singles, more some of the artists who were doing well and whether we've talked about them before. I think we've discussed the Bee Gees, so we won't discuss them. But the first big number one, so the first big act, and I don't think we talked about them, is the Village People with YMCA. Of course, they did have other hits, but the funny thing is, the first thing I can think of is going forward to the 90s when, you know, that Village People have their the songs like YMCA and In the Navy, and obviously I knew some of their songs, but when Pet Shop Boys came along and took Go West high in the charts, I don't even think that was a song I necessarily knew. Well, it's not one that had remembered. I have a feeling it may be one of those cases where the Pet Shop Boys version charted higher than the original, but I'm surprised to see how many albums they have. They have an album in '77, two albums in '78, two albums in '79.
And they basically were the straightest band in the history of pop music, weren't they? I mean, I find it hard to believe. I was, you know, I wouldn't have been aware that such things existed back in '79. But what gets me about it is I can't remember how aware people were. I mean, maybe people in the know about such things would have been very aware, but because I don't remember. You know, now you imagine the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, and what have you would absolutely pounce on an act that was so blatantly gay, you know. But I actually, you know, being, you know, how dare this be in our living rooms and everything like that. And you kind of think, I don't think we were kind of conscious of it. I mean, I know that there's the whole thing about the various is it stereotypes or types that you know, the outfits, and so and these are all quite iconic looks, if you like, of the time. And I just feel that it's fascinating to me that we didn't really make the connection maybe I didn't make the connection, because I've always been the last person to work anything out, let's be honest. But I just kind of think it's interesting that it was only when the Navy recruiting scandal, you know, and the Navy didn't want them or were upset about the song or whatever, broke, that I even became aware that they might not be just five straight guys who like dressing up or whatever it was.
Yeah,
I wouldn't have seen them at that age. I wouldn't have seen them as being any different to say Shawaddy Waddy. You know what I mean? They were wearing stage outfits. So I think a lot of it's more in the lyrics than it is in the look. But is it that blatant? I just think, because you find. People would completely straight people unironically would sing songs like "It's Raining Men" and things and not see the connection at all. I think it's just fascinating, really, how sometimes we are either so unaware or just I think we lived in more innocent times. People were just not as savvy, not as tuned in to different cultures. We all just assumed everybody was more or less the same back then. Weirdly, unless I just happen to be the most naive, most untuned in person in the history of everything ever, which is a considered possibility.
There's there are lots of different generations of the different looks over the years. On Wikipedia, you've got all the different lineups and all the different. But I was going to look at the actual some of the singles, how many hits they actually had. So. Their first singles were in 1977. They weren't sort of straight out of the box as far as hits were concerned. So their first single is San Francisco, You've Got Me, and it got to number 102, even in America, and only 45 in the UK. And then, there's a lot of singles I've never heard of, like In Hollywood, Everyone Is a Star, which looks like it was a hit in the Netherlands, and it was a dance hit, but it wasn't really until YMCA, which was number 2 in America, number 1 in lots of other places. But by then, I think that's probably their third album already.
Right.
But then, considering they're releasing one every 6 months, of course, in the Navy, that was a big hit in America and in the UK. That was even number 1 in some territories.
Where were they based? Were they New York or were they LA? So, were they East Coast or West Coast? I mean, I always got the impression they were West Coast, but then again, I'm probably
maybe I'll have a look when we go back to the main page.
It sort of interests me that I can't, was there any kind of backlash against them as an act? Because obviously, Middle America has always been a little bit had problems with non-conformity, shall we say?
The Go West, which was another 1979 one, that wasn't a hit in America. That was number 45, and it was only 15 here. So I quite like it when, but I quite like it when Pet Shop Boys were quite canny to sort of choose one that wasn't so well known and make it into a big hit. It wasn't like they went and did one of the already big. They sort of it's like when Stranger Things revived the Running Up That Hill for Kate Bush. I was kind of hoping that they'd choose one that was, I mean, to be fair, in America it hadn't been a hit, but I was kind of hoping they'd choose one that hadn't been a hit anywhere before, so it would be a totally
new song to people.
But I guess you can't expect everything. But I mean,
when you're supreme benevolent dictator of the universe, you can change these things.
Of course,
with mastery of time and space.
Of course, they had a film which I've never seen called Can't Stop the Music. And I think I remember a friend of mine saying that his mum took him to see it, but I'm not sure it was really meant for like 8-year-old boys.
The thing is that sometimes mums, again, I mean, this possibly explains a lot, but mums kind of just think, oh, yeah, you find even now that kids will sort of really like an act that's not really aimed at them, and they'll get taken to these concerts and be surrounded by sort of screaming teenage girls, and there's an 8-year-old boy with his mum there, and it is kind of weird. I mean, it's funny. I now you've mentioned it, I do remember the film. It has that air of something that turned up in Looking.
Looking at their singles. I mean, their main peak was 1978 into 79. And really, just the two songs, really, YMCA and In the Navy. I mean, there were chart positions for other singles, but considering how much they're sort of,
I get the impression that there was a little bit of backlash over here. I mean, not necessarily against American culture or even particularly of gay culture. I think camp sort of went out of fashion for a while and then sort of transformed itself into new romanticism, so it kind of for a while, we had a different kind of of course you had Adamant turning up, It's kind of it became, I don't know. Again, it's one of those things that, as ever in life, things get divided and sent sort of to the edges, to the extremes. So I don't know. I kind of feel that their fashionableness, a bit like Carl Douglas and his kung fu, they're not really fashionable anymore, and people move on.
Or it might be that. The mainstream did catch up and go, oh, I see. Those two songs. Again, they might have taken two songs to kind of for people to kind of think, oh, that's not what we meant.
Well, I know I've mentioned him, but I remember the kung fu fighting, yo yo ho ho ho, and that. And I remember the Dance the Kung Fu, which was his follow-up. I remember those two specifically. And then, as far as I remember musically, never heard of again. And you get those moments like the Demis Roussos, and you get that sort of summer of Demis Roussos. But next year, nobody's interested. We move on very slowly. I mean, was it they say in the League of Gentlemen, shit business, but we do as consumers of music, we move on very quickly, and people do get left behind unless it's adapt or die. Really.
I remember a friend of mine who I only met in the early noughties. He was interested in music in a way that I've never experienced before, in that he obviously liked what was popular at the time. So when I looked at his quite small collection of music, he had some Suede albums, right. and I liked Suede, and I thought, oh, that's cool. But then I'd see Celine Dion or I don't know, something like Daniel Bedingfield, or somebody who was more recent that was very, very number one. And I realised that he had just been buying. What he bought was what was very big at the time, but completely going across genres, because in my head I'd be like, but Suede is really good and Daniel Bedingfield isn't very good, really. Not so, or not. Oh, well, it just really screwed my mind a bit.
I remember buying a double CD a few years ago. Well, it must be maybe 15, 20 years ago now. And it was one of those terrible pop compilations that was current at the time. But there were about 6 tracks on it that I thought, I'd quite like those 6 tracks. And so it kind of became, I'll buy it because it was, cheap in a bargain bin or whatever. So those 6 tracks make it worthwhile kind of thing. And you look at some of the other stuff on there now and you think, oh my God, what was I thinking?
well, the thing that surprised me about my friend was that not only was he moving through what he only really liked what was current, because I sort of said to him, "Oh, you got Suede or something," and he go, "Yeah, oh, if you want it, have it." And so he wasn't interested. Wasn't interested. So he was into what was in the charts in 2004 by then, and something from 1997 was, oh yeah, I liked it then. But
that's psychologically fascinating. So that really is interesting. That it's like it's what people are listening to now is all I'm interested in.
Yeah, because generally
that must have made radio very difficult. Really.
Yeah, because generally I still like perhaps 75 or 80% of what I used to like. As well as liking new things, I don't sort of really. I just always accumulate. There's only very few things I've gone back to and thought, yeah.
You must always have found him in the kitchen at parties. That guy. I mean, so they're playing stuff from last year.
Yeah.
Give me a beer.
Well, the next person I thought we'd move on to, because he had number 1 in 1979, is Ian Dury and the Blockheads. We definitely haven't spoken about him.
ID and the BH.
The first thing I always think about, I mean, it wasn't his first single, but Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick was his number 1. And the funny thing is, my friend Harry, his dad, I have a feeling that's his favourite song. And he's just not the sort of person you'd think would be listening to Ian Dury and the Blockheads. And I'm not sure, to be fair, whether he ever listened to any other Ian Dury and the Blockheads. I think, yeah. I
mean, he's a poet, basically, isn't he? He's a poet and an artist. I mean, it comes from an art. Is it Chelsea School of Art? I think it was, maybe. It's wonderful. I was a sort of late finder. I've got some Ian Dury compilations. I've got that redo of New Boots and Panties that was done by the cover artists. It's just, the words, the lyrics are just so clever. You get these people who come along sometimes who are poets, really. I mean, like John Cooper Clarke and everything like that. But the ones who then turn it into a music career, and they're such phenomenal songs, Billericay Dicky and all that stuff. It's just brilliant wordplay. I love Ian Dury. He's this terrible, sad loss, and of course, did a lot. Again, I know some people criticise his attitude to his own disabilities, but actually, I think that kind of thing is exactly the most powerful way of approaching it. This is me. This is how I am, and if you don't like it, you can get lost, basically. And I think that's a lot better way of letting people have their own voice, if you like.
As usual, the charts only tell a very small, part of the story. He had 3 top 10 hits, and the first was "What a Waste," which was to number song. 9. Yeah, and then "Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick," and then "Reasons to Be Cheerful" Part 3, which was number 3. Other than that, there was a number 22 with "I Want to Be Straight," and Superman's Big Sister, which scraped in at 51, but
But if you play the greatest hits, you actually realise how many of them it's a phenomenal collection of work, body of work, if you like.
Because he'd been around. Well, the first single.
He was knocking on a bit, wasn't he, for a pop star?
Yeah. He started in '74 with Rough Kids and as Kilburn and the High Roads. Of course,
the Rockheads are still going in some form.
Actually, that's weird, because Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll is one I would have thought was well known, but that doesn't even have a chart position over here. But it got to number 12 in Sweden. Kind of bizarrely, slightly bizarre.
Probably got played on the tube a lot, you know.
But
or on old Grey Whistle Test or whatever. Sorry, Whistle Test.
I really need to listen to more of his stuff, whether it's one I do have. Of course, he had a sort of slight resurgence in the profoundly in love with Pandora from Adrian Mole, which that got to number 45. I also do remember buying a song he did called Drip Fed Fred with Madness, which was, I think it was around the time that, I mean, Madness have kind of been back together again for quite a while, releasing albums now, but I have a feeling it was one of their earlier Reformation albums, and I remember liking. I think I remember liking.
You see, you've reminded me, and I had completely forgotten this because I don't really do concerts. I've never been a huge fan, but for some bizarre reason, I got dragged to London one day about 30 years ago to see Madness and Morrissey and Ian Dury in some Finsbury Park, I think it was.
Yeah.
Unless I'm very much mistaken, some concert in Finsbury Park. And yeah, I remember Ian Dury being the absolute standout act of the day. That was my favourite time of the day. And again, I'm not much of one for standing in crowds, especially crowds of skinheads, because there were a lot of skinheads there. Yeah. Because of the Madness thing, I suppose. But yeah, it's Dury, just wonderful act. I'm not much of a one for saying, I actually saw him play, but actually I'm surprised. Because I had also completely forgotten that.
I didn't realise how much acting he did, although I don't know how big each of these parts are, but he's got a dozen or more acting credits.
It's that what do they call Renaissance man? Is it the people who have lots of but it's the arts, isn't it? It's moving in arts and art circles. I think the poetry, the music, the acting, the art. It's all part of that sort of. It feels very London. I mean, I don't know much about London life, but it feels very much part of that London arts community thing.
Now, I'm looking forward to this next bit because I don't think we've ever discussed them. We did mention them earlier, but 1979 was a big year for Blondie. And Heart of Glass was number one for 4 weeks, and Sunday Girl was number one for 3 weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't have other singles in between. That Blondie were one of the first groups that for ages I was kind of known in my house for liking the Beatles and ABBA, encouraged by my parents. But Blondie's greatest hits, which I think their first greatest hits, was released before they had actually split up the first time. I think it went up to about Tide is High sort of era. But I think there's one more album after that. But I had a copy of that and I hid it because it wasn't it wasn't the Beatles or ABBA. So
you hid it amongst the bees. Maybe you might have got away with it.
Not that there's anything about Blondie that is inappropriate, but
I have a vinyl of the best of some.
I'm a big fan of all of their early albums. Perhaps less so their last one.
Again, because they were. It's funny because Blondie were very pop, really. I mean, despite the fact of their punk credentials and came from the punk scene in America, didn't they? But the thing that gets me about Blondie is that when I was that age, when they were in the charts or they were performing and touring, they weren't seen as cool. They were, it was this little bit square. The not really punks followed Blondie, if you see what I'm saying. It was, the diehard punk fans were just sort of looking across and going, God, honestly, and if you stitched that onto your jacket, people would think you were a bit of an idiot and all that kind of thing. And yet, because they were also, shall we say, hormonal teenage boys, a lot of them liked Debbie Harry.
Yeah.
Also, I think the fact is that coming from punk, maybe they thought that Debbie Harry was, more likely to look at them twice, shall we say?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I kind of almost think of the sort of, or at least Debbie Harry being more like a 60s girl, a sort of like a Supremes type sort of, but more that sort of.
She was a little bit older as well than a lot of the pop acts of the time. Again, they'd been around the houses a bit more.
She'd been in other bands.
Yeah,
I kind of think maybe not the Supremes. So maybe that's not a good. I guess whoever did
Hard Yards. That was the thing.
Yeah, whoever did things like the My Boyfriend's Back, or that sort of whatever you want to call that.
She did do covers. I mean, the interesting thing is, of course, that they actually had such a run of chart success. I mean, it's ridiculous actually how many songs they had out. I mean, the only real comparable band I can think of that may have had a similar amount of chart success that was fronted by a woman or women was probably Bananarama, really. Of that era. I mean, even Kate Bush, by that stage, the bubble had burst in terms of, the long-term thing. I mean, Blondie were around forever.
I mean, their first album, Blondie, a bit like you said about Ian Jury, it doesn't have any hit. Well, the first album doesn't have any UK hits on it, but you'll probably recognise at least a couple of the titles of the singles. One of them being "Rip Her to Shreds" and in the Flesh. And there's another one called Ex Offender, which I know only because I know those early albums well. Their first hit came off Plastic Letters, which is probably one of my favourite. I think Plastic Letters is my favourite Blondie album, more so than Parallel Lines. Plastic Letters has one of my
Parallel Lines trips over into mainstream, doesn't it? I think that if there's that thing with the early albums where they're not quite mainstream, that somehow you feel it belongs to you a bit more, I think.
Yeah, I mean, whatever you want to call, say, Rip Her to Shreds, whatever type of pop you want to call that, there's more of that type of more attitude, slightly more rock
sassy
pop, sassiness, sassy pop rock. But also, Plastic Letters has one of my favourite songs ever because it's so weird. I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear, which is sort of about telepathy and things, but with a really catchy tune. No, they did start having top 10 hits from Plastic Letters. Denny, which was a cover, but Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear was number 10. I think we were a little bit late to catch up to a certain extent anyway. So because
you get your breakthrough and then suddenly people discover you're there. And but I think, like I say, by the time of the big hits, it suddenly they felt a lot more mainstream. Like I say, it's that early raw stuff is actually the only thing I can think of that's similar. And again, funnily enough, because I was saying I couldn't think of another sort of girl-fronted band, but the Pretenders, the first two Pretenders albums feel rough and ready and raw. Yeah. And then it all feels a bit mainstream and conventional after that, although they are albums that I like. But it's it does feel that switch is like you've been discovered. It's like, if you've got your Blondie album and you're trying to hide it from your mum and dad, and then a couple of years later it's the sort of thing that your mum and dad are actually listening to on the radio and going, oh, this has got a good beat or whatever. It's kind of weird that once things tip into the mainstream, you sort of if you've discovered them beforehand, you kind of feel it's not mine anymore. More of these people I don't like have started liking it. Although
there's that thing with like old gold radio stations where more and more that you can't just have one old gold radio station. Really, I don't know whether somebody has thought about this, but just because it's old doesn't mean to say that. No.
It has old as some of the other old stuff. Yeah,
because say if my parents wanted to listen to an old gold station with 60s music on or 50s or music on, they're not going to sit there and listen to the Sex Pistols just because it's 50 years old or something.
No. Although that is quite frightening in its own way as well, isn't it?
Well, it's not quite got there yet, but it's getting on for the early days of punk. It's over 45 now.
Yeah.
Now.
Well, I mean, when you hear about, the tragedy in John Lydon's life, you kind of think, God Almighty, you realise he's an old man now.
I've just read an autobiography of Adam Ant, but we'll probably end up talking about him eventually, so I won't say too much now. But it was an interesting book. The weird thing is the early Blondie hits were hits in the UK, but not in America. So Denny, I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear, Picture This, which was number 12, Hanging on the Telephone, which was number 5 in the UK. They weren't hits at all in America. The first international hit was Heart of Glass, which was number 1 in many places. And those were all off Parallel Lines. Sunday Girl, we've already said that was number 1. And of course, there's another song from Parallel Lines, One Way or Another, which got to the stage of being included on Greatest Hits, but was never actually.
Wasn't one of them used in Officer and a Gentleman? Wasn't
it's quite possibly. I'm not.
I just remember that from a sleeve note. I can't remember which track it was. That's the only thing.
Yeah, I mean, One Way or Another definitely got became sort of well known, whether it was an advert, whether it was a film appearance, but it was never an official single. But it got to the stage where it ended up being on their Greatest Hits.
But I absolutely adore Atomic. I think Atomic is phenomenal. And I think Atomic is one of those songs that, because it had that sort of dirty disco beat, it got, I think the 12-inch version specifically, it was just huge in nightclubs, and it feels like a proper sweaty nightclub song to me. If I have any fond memories at all of that sort of era, it's probably people playing the 12-inch of Atomic.
We'll come to how well that did in a second. Of course, then we move on to Eat to the Beat, which is another good album. That had Dreaming, which was number 2. Union City Blue, which is one of my favourites, although that only got to number 13. I'm kind of surprised that didn't do better. There's probably a story behind why it didn't do better. But
what's the one about eating cars?
Oh, that's Rapture.
Rapture.
Yeah. Then, of course, they did do, well, you mentioned soundtracks. They did Call Me. That was from American Gigolo.
Oh, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, sorry. Yes. That was I've got it all mixed up in my mind.
That was another number 1. And then Atomic, which was by then about the third single off Eat to the Beat. That was also number 1. Then
Set you up for life, mate. Set you up for life. 3 number 1s off one album.
Yeah, they had The Tide is High, which was the first single off Auto American, and Rapture number 5. But then the last sort of top 40 hit, it came in 1982 with Island of Lost Souls with number 11. The last album, The Hunter, I think they kind of knew that they were all burnt out, and various different people were ill one way or another. Not one way or another by Blondie.
Although,
yeah, of course. That wasn't their last number 1, because I remember
many years later.
Yeah, I remember being very excited when Maria was number 1 in 1999, because I was sort of it came out of nowhere that they would come back and do so well.
4 years ago, Paul.
and it wasn't a hit in America, though. It got to number 82 in America. It did have some other top 10 appearances in some other countries, but not in America. And then they did a single in 2003 called Good Boys, which got to number 12. I mean, they've continued releasing albums, but their singles haven't. Well, I mean, nobody over a certain age's singles do very well these days.
I've got that CD. I think is it called The Collection? And I think the thing is that I think I only actually bought that was because of her duet, with the Well Did You Ever with was it Tom Waits? Oh, Iggy Pop. Iggy Pop. No, it's Iggy Pop. You're absolutely right. Yes. I just loved that. I heard that on a radio one day. I thought, I've got to get that. That's just a phenomenal thing. And of course, that's going back to, is it Breakfast at Tiffany's or something like that? It's just it's ridiculously sort of, you kind of think, what is it? What happens to old punks? Well, what they do is they end up sampling old musicals. But it's a great track.
It's a shame that Debbie Harry didn't have more sort of
solo
success. Yes, solo success. Although French Kissing in the USA was pretty big. That was top 10 over here. And I Want That Man, which was written by the Thompson twins for her.
But sometimes it's just the band is the engine room, isn't it? And sometimes what drives. Again, when I go back to Atomic, that sound, that grinding, sweaty, pulsing, dance rhythm. It doesn't necessarily come from those solo works. It feels like it comes from a band working together at the top of their powers and doing something astonishing. Really,
they were definitely a rock band with a pop singer, I guess.
Yeah.
And
much mimicked. I think that's the thing. There's a lot of acts trying to get in on that. That idea format. The glamorous front woman, as it were, it worked. I mean, who are they? What are they called? Pink Sunshine people.
Fuzzbox.
Yeah, and people like that sort of seem to be riffing on that Blondie.
And then in the 90s, and people like some of the Britpop bands like Sleeper, or even to a certain extent,
even the Joyride people.
Roxette.
Again, same. It just feels like there's a. Should we say she cast a long shadow?
Yeah, I've seen mentions of like garbage that.
I know there'd been female-fronted bands before Blondie, but I think someone saw a formula for success in it. That people would buy the records maybe just because of the glamour of the the person at the front. But then again, a lot of boy bands are sold on the glamour of the lads as well. So I mean, it's not. Shall we say it's not a unique formula.
Another band who I'd say remind me of a sort of a Blondie template. Who in a way it's strange because they couldn't be from different parts of the world or different parts of the world is Texas, because once Texas came back and started having a lot of hits in the 90s and noughties, there's definitely, I almost got more interested in Texas. They'd have songs like Summer Sun and there was one called Telephone X, I think, and they're all very Blondie sort of songs, in the best possible way, and very catchy choruses, and good. Some of the people who've wanted to be like them perhaps didn't have the vocals of a Debbie Harry, but I think Charlene Spiteri does have a very good voice, and probably another reason that she reminds me a bit of Blondie or Debbie Harry, because the vocals match the type of songs and the vocals being strong as well. But after Heart of Brass, we have Tragedy by the Bee Gees, but we spoke about them last time. I want to look at the next person only because I'm not sure what other hits she had, if she did have any other hits, but I'm sure she had a big...
Shaking Stevens for a second.
No, we're a bit early. Well, I'd say we're a bit early for Shaking Stevens, but only as far as big hits are concerned, because I remember looking at Shaking Stevens and he was around from the very early 70s, releasing singles, but just not getting hits with them. We've got I Will Survive next, which is one of those songs that kind of, it just totally dominates a career. But
I was going to say it dominates karaoke, but no, you're right. Yeah, yes.
I think, I'm sure I think she's still singing, because I feel like there was a recent album that was a big success for Kylie called Disco. And as they do these days, they tend to release the album and then 12 months down the line, they release an extended edition with different things and maybe some extra tracks. And I think she did because they were all new disco songs, or like what 2020 disco would be like. Imagining what 2020. And one of the extra songs, I'm pretty sure it was a duet with Gloria Gaynor, a completely new song. But so let's see. Well, of course, I always forget. Her first single was "Never Can Say Goodbye." Which of course has been covered by many other people and by everybody, or has it been? I'm trying to see if
she's certainly a cornerstone of any of those disco compilations that you might choose to buy. She's one of the disco divas, I suppose is the expression, but certainly the disco greats.
There's actually a 1965 single by Gloria Gaynor that wasn't a hit, but her first sort of big hit takes us to 1974, which is Never Can Say Goodbye, which you may have heard of. You may have heard me mention that before. The Communards had a big version, number 4, back in the 80s, but her version did equally as well, and in fact slightly better. Got to number 2 in the UK, number 9 in the US. But then other big singles include Reach Out, I'll Be There, number 14. No,
that's got to have been covered by everybody else.
Yeah, that's a 4. That's a 4.
Yeah, 4 tops. Yeah, I was thinking I could see four guys doing the old synchronized dancing in the suits for that one. Yeah,
but she had lots of singles, but wasn't really, after some initial success, she had a single in the UK called "How High the Moon."
Oh, right.
That's a jazz standard. That got to number 33. Yeah.
So she wasn't. She wasn't a singer-songwriter. She was a singer of other people's.
And it took it to 1978 for I Was Survive to come out. I'm just trying to see whether was she the first. You presume that she was the first person to do it. She, as you say, she didn't write it, but I think hers is the
classic, the definitive version.
Yeah. After that, there was "Let Me Know I Have a Right." 1970, that was 79, number 32. "I Am What I Am," number 13 in the UK.
That the Popeye song?
That's from La Cage aux Folles.
I am what I am.
Yeah. And I Will Survive. There was a remix in '93, got to number 5.
Okay.
It's sort of I Can't Stop Writing Songs About You, with Kylie Minogue. That was off the
disco,
the extra, the extended edition. Yeah. Oh. But it really does come down to two big songs, I suppose. I mean, if you really were going to sum it up, but a lot of albums, a lot of other songs, and they just didn't get the same attention as the really big ones. But sometimes a song that size can make a career. So, or to have 2 songs of that size. Now, the next number 1 is Bright Eyes. So we've got Art Garfunkel. So
Art Alone, Lonely Art.
Yes.
And Garfunkel, as he's sometimes known.
There's a few Garfunkel songs I really like. I can't remember if I had it was a greatest hits or what it was. I mean,
of just he or of the pair of them.
I mean, but I do like Simon and Garfunkel, but I do either have an album or maybe it's. You almost wouldn't have thought he had enough to do greatest hits of his own stuff. But saying that, he has he has an album 73, an album 75, an album 77, 79, 81. So he did do quite a lot of.
81 would have been after the Central Park reunion as well, wouldn't it? I was listening relatively recently to the Paul Simon anthology CD set. You forget how many songs and how good they are on the whole. I mean, I know some people took a dislike to Paul Simon and sort of some of the cultural appropriation that they accused him of, but actually Simon and Garfunkel as a duet were phenomenal, and Art. I don't know who you could say had a bigger career really afterwards, after the split, because Art Garfunkel became kind of iconic in his own way and did his thing, you know.
He did acting as well. Actually, I guess this is before Simon and Garfunkel. He has a single in '59 called Beat Love, although it doesn't seem to have charted anyway, and Forgive Me in 1961, which he was known as Artie Gar back then.
It always amazes me because you do get these early recordings of people who were destined to become the greats, if you like. And the same with those early Bee Gees recordings when they were just sort of like, you know, a novelty combo of lads. You know, it is kind of weird how long people are around, but sometimes how long they are performing before they are, quotes, discovered for the things that people actually remember them for.
His first solo album from '73, Angel Clare, it didn't really have success in the UK, at least not with the singles. Yeah, I got to number 14, but actually singles-wise, not at all. There's a single called All I Know, which got to number 9 in America. I don't know if I would know that if I heard it. But there's one, I don't know if this is an EP, because, but there's I have to read you the title of this. There's a song called Do Spacemen Pass Dead Souls on Their Way to the Moon? That sounds like a fun song.
Blimey. Do androids dream of electric sheep?
Yes. Yeah. Then he had a single called Second Avenue, which was a minor hit. But then suddenly you've got I Only Have Eyes for You, number 18 in the US, but number 1 in the UK. That's in '75.
Obviously found his niche, found his market.
But that's a cover because that's was written for the film Dames in 1934.
That sounds a progressive movie.
Well, 1934 maybe it was. Then we have Breakaway. Now I know this one. This one wasn't
Take Away My Breakaway. Did he do the song for the advert?
No, I don't. There's a single here. Doesn't seem to have charted very well, but I remember when I listened to that best of album of his, there's a song called I Believe When I Fall in Love It Will Be Forever, which was a really nice song. You know, he was releasing singles, but he wasn't necessarily having big hits. But when he was having big hits, he was having big hits. So you get, you know, suddenly Bright Eyes sort of comes out of nowhere.
That's the film, isn't it? That's the film.
Yes. Watership Down.
Very, again, you know, big film of its own. I mean, this is still when we're doing cell animation, you know. I mean, big animated films were quite the novelty at that stage, and it was huge. I think it was Watership Down a British film? I think it might have. So, you know, it was kind of waving the flag and, you know, doing its bit for Blighty and all that kind of thing as well. But it was a hit film. You know, parents were taking their kids to it to traumatize them.
There's another song I recognise, which wasn't a big hit, but I recognise it from that album. Must be the Art Garfunkel album, which I think is the greatest hits from about '84. There's a song called Sometimes When I'm Dreaming on it, which I remember that. And what surprised me most, he doesn't have a great deal of big hits other than those massive number ones. I guess in the score of things, one of his biggest hits was from 1997 in the UK, number 17, Daydream. I really don't remember that.
But then again, it was a time in my life I don't remember much about. So,
so after Art Garfunkel, we've got Blondie again. We've got Anita Ward with Ring My Bell. which was obviously another number one. That don't know whether she had any other hits. No, not really. But
you get these occasional one-hit wonders. It's amazing, actually, to me, that watching sort of the old Top of the Pops on a Friday night, how many people have just had this moment in the sun and then completely been forgotten about.
Do like Ring My Bell? It's a good one. But yeah, it's weird. When I've been watching Top of the Pops or repeats of Top of the Pops, I tend to enjoy watching the eras that I know the music of now, but I never saw the video. That I never saw
at
the time. And now it's into the 90s. It's even in it's coming into the Britpop era, which I was very fond of. But it just seems like last week. I don't really need to watch it. I don't feel like I need to watch it again. I saw it at the time, but I was much more into watching the early 80s Top of the Pops, which I didn't see necessarily at the time.
Well, it's still frightening that the 90s is 30 years ago. It's doesn't quite compute even now.
Now, we haven't talked about the next number one, although, let's group him together because we have Our Friends Electric by Tubeway Army, but by a couple of months down the line, he'd already gone solo and was Gary Newman. So he has. So the funny thing about Gary Newman is he does keep reinventing himself. I've actually, there's been a couple of songs.
An aeroplane.
I think he's probably also had singing lessons and is better than he probably was back in the day. There's been 2 or 3 songs. They're quite heavy songs, but quite heavy, but with kind of good strong tunes. I remember
buying that EP of his that I think is the EP, the live EP, made the charts a few years later. But I remember buying that. That's
there's one that I don't think I would sort of say I'm a fan who would buy albums, but again, when they were showing Top of the Pops repeats from the 80s, there would be the odd song of his. He'd turn up and I go, oh, I'd never heard this one, and so there are more. Because
I think, I got a compilation, a CD of his somewhere, a double CD of his, and I'm amazed when I put it on how much there is. Because I always think he had about 3 songs, but it's amazing actually how many there were.
I think certainly in the last 2 or 3 years there was a song by his that I happened to hear, which went into my favourite songs of the year. I didn't bother with the album. I just thought, I'm sure there might be other good songs on that album, but I bought his autobiography because I like sort of rock biographies. And
there is a tendency for a lot of electronic music from a certain era. I kind of talk about the Stocker Aitken and Waterman era that can now sound incredibly tinny with the electronic drums. And one thing you can't say about the electronic music on Gary Newman is that it sounds weak. It's very strong and very well mixed, and there's some blooming good rhythms. There's some blooming good samples in there to be had. I think Gary Newman's back catalogue is a lot stronger than possibly even people who are into music think.
I was going to have a look at. There aren't a lot of Tubeway Army. I mean, Our Friends Electric is the only hit, and the other singles didn't chart. But I was just going to see what other songs that people may have forgotten about, because actually glancing at it between 79 and it's not like Cars and Our Friends Electric were the only top 10 hits. There were the only 2 number ones, but there were other top 10 hits. We've got Complex, We Are Glass, I Die, You Die, number 6. She's Got Claws, number 6. We Take Mystery to Bed. And then it mainly goes to sort of number 20, number 32, but then you get the occasional one that suddenly, perhaps a couple of singles would drop out the top 40, and then suddenly he'd have a run of singles that were like 28, 20. So I mean, he never really stopped, as far as I know. No. There were singles.
It's funny though, isn't it? Some pop stars, some rock stars, they're constantly they're news, So he was one of those people who kept turning up in news stories, even if he wasn't actually turning up in the charts. It's an interesting thing that the press have a kind of endless fascination with certain personalities, and Gary Newman is definitely one of those.
Yeah. Now, coming towards the end of the episode, I just want to cover a couple of. I think there's a few that we might keep till
Next time.
Mikey, only because I feel like we need to address Cliff Richard.
Trailers on my show. I keep thinking this. If I'm running short one week, maybe I should do a trailer for next week's show, and I never get around to doing it. I'm never that organised. But I just think next time.
I have considered it, and sometimes I do 2-part stories. And I actually. That could be quite fun doing the recap and from last episode.
Previously on the Shylock.
I know. We did one last year where it was the garden party with the vampires, and I was very impressed. Having compiled an hour and a half episode into about a minute of sound bites, and I was like, that sounds really good. But then I would say. Maybe we'll address one more act, and then we'll we might keep some of these bigger acts for the beginning of next episode. So let's just look at who we have got, and I think I know which one I'd like to speak about. Okay. But I think we need to keep Cliff for longer because there's a whole lot of. He's such a long career, and I don't think we talked about him and we've also got the police, but I feel like we should keep the police till next time because that's the beginning of
police. Dark spaces. Remind me that we go to dark spaces with the police. But yes, go
on. There we've got Lena Martell. I don't. With One Day at a Time. I don't know that Lena Martell is quite in our discussion really.
Yes, in our toy box.
Yes. No, and I think we've talked about Dr. Hook at least. He had a number one with When You're in Love with a Beautiful Woman. We also have Pink Floyd with Another Brick in the Wall. What we might do is talk briefly about Pink Floyd because they don't have much singles to discuss. We might talk about Pink Floyd after we said goodbye. Just briefly. Keep Cliff and the police for next episode. So the only other group
police. There's a duet that we can't mention.
I mean Lena Martell has a very long career, but she only has that one hit in the UK. I do remember.
You've all heard of her. Yes,
I do remember this. I do remember seeing on Top of the Pops. I don't know how. I didn't realise she was Scottish. I thought she was American for some reason. I don't know why. She's Scottish with a long career in theatre, television, and musicals. Right. She's recorded 30 albums, which includes. So why? Oh, and it was a cover. One Day at a Time was a cover. It's a Chris Christopherson song, but it doesn't really say why it did so well. But anyway, so that's us covering Lena Martell. Sorry, Lena. The band who probably is the most 1979 band probably out of all of these is. Let me try and do an impression if I can remember the lyrics. Here we go. Here's my impression. I had you on my wireless back in '52.
Lying awake and dead and cheering it on you. That's enough.
Yes.
Video Killed the Radio Star by Buggles.
Buggles, yes, who not many, or some of whom became Yes, or an iteration of Yes in there.
Yes.
Which, quietly aside, some of my favourite Yes work is that era.
Of course, Trevor Horn, a massive producer, but it's a shame really, because that song was so big, and yet they did do other good songs. But I also think they released the follow-up singles. It's one of those things that it sort of makes me sad, is that their fourth single was a fantastic song and should have been. I always wonder how it would have done.
CDs killed the cassette tape.
I just wonder. I just wonder whether it had done better, because it was one of those things where each single did less well. Of the four singles released from the first album, so Video Killed the Radio Star got to number 1. Living in the Plastic Age got to number 16. Yeah, I mean, it's okay, but it's still not as good as the fourth single. Clean got to number 38.
Don't remember that one at all.
You've got to consider also, I can't remember quite when we went to a top 40. I think Top of the Pops is very interested in the top 30 for a lot of years. So when you look at chart positions and it's number 32, you think, oh well, it was top 40, but I don't think top 40 was always as important as it became later on. Certainly wouldn't even be included. Now the fourth single was called Elstree, and it's
Elstree. Remember me? Gosh, yes, I do.
You you remember that one, and yet it was the least successful of the four songs.
Yes. Now are we? This is one of those things. Are we now approaching the actual video era, in pop videos? Has MTV started yet?
I'm not 100% sure, but Video Killed the Radio Star has quite a famous video.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. The video is starting to make an impression now, and I think I may have seen the Elstree video played on things like, I don't know, Superstore or Swap Shop or whatever, more than I actually, I know it as a song, if you see what I mean. I'm starting to think that might be why I know it.
Because it's quite a catchy song. It's just I didn't.
And it's wonderful. I mean, it's interesting that John Vangelis also did songs about old movies. So old movies was a bit of a thing back then. But Elstree, Remember Me, yes, crikey.
I just wonder whether it would have done a lot better had it been the second single. But what I didn't know for many years was that they did a second album in 1981 called Adventures in Modern Recording, but there wasn't any hits off there.
Right.
Although, bizarrely, I recently discovered that, well, I'm not that much of a fan of the band Dollar as far as the members of Dollar, but there are one or two Dollar songs that were pretty good, and Trevor Horn produced them. But
Dollar did a couple of decent tracks.
Exactly, yeah.
Teresa Bazaar, wasn't it?
What I didn't realise until I got bought that second Buggles album, which I never really got into as much as I should have done. What I did discover was that Buggles did the original version of the song Videotech, which was one of Dollar's later hits, which, again, wasn't Dollar's biggest hit, but I remember, again, singing it on Top of the Pops when I was watching the repeats and thinking, oh, I didn't know this one. This is really good. And then finding, oh, it wasn't even a Dollar song. It was a cover version of a Buggles song, a flop Buggles song. But anyway, well, there's not a lot more to say about Buggles because they were such a flash in the pan in some ways. But again, a song that's sort of, I think even 30 years later, I think Robbie Williams named one of his albums a play on Video Killed the Radio Star. Actually, I wouldn't be surprised if Trevor Horn didn't produce that album as well.
Wouldn't surprise me at all.
But anyway, well, we will briefly come to Pink Floyd in a second, but we shall say goodbye. And, Martin, thank you.
Always a pleasure, Paul.
I think it's best that we won't quite step into the 80s. We'll step into the 80s next episode, but I think there's a little bit of 79.
I'll go and dig out my shoulder pads and my white jacket.
Yeah, we'll keep Cliff and the police at the very end of 79 for next time.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, listeners. Join us again soon. Goodbye for now.
Care. Bye. morning, oh, it's just another brick in the wall.
Yeah, because Pink Floyd, and I don't know why, what made them, decide, we'll do a single, because they're generally known for albums. Although I guess they started off, they're early. They did 60s, do singles at the very, they did do singles at the very start.
It's been around a while by the time The Wall came out. And I think there was a question on Pointless a few weeks ago where people had to name Pink Floyd albums, and I was struggling. But I remember things like Animals coming out and those sorts of albums. But the two biggies, of course, Wish You Were Here and Dark Side of the Moon, which are, I think, doesn't it, Dark Side of the Moon or Wish You Were Here was like in the chart for like 23 years or something non-stop, a ridiculous amount of time.
I mean, I really like the song Wish You Were Here, but I didn't discover it until the noughties, because I had a friend who was a very big Pink Floyd fan, and we sort of slightly bonded over the fact that around the time that Doctor Who returned, Pink Floyd returned. And
Division Bell.
No, it was even after that, because that was Division Bell was around the time I was at university, more like 92. Because I remember people coming into the cafe.
That was about the McGann era.
I remember people coming into the cafe with this flashing thing.
Yes. Pulse. I remember Pulse.
Yes, Pulse. Oh, Division Bell. When was Division? Division Bell was 94. What was Pulse? Some sort of compilation, maybe.
Yeah, I think so, or a concert. It could have been a live, but it had that throbbing LED.
That's right.
Really annoying, actually, if you put it in your shelf.
Around university time, I had a copy of Relics, which was the sort of greatest hits of the early stuff. But I didn't even know things like Wish You Were Here. No. But I'm not helped by the fact that they didn't even release quite mainstream. I mean, there's nothing particularly sort of shocking or
they're not easy to dance to.
No, but you could have released "Wish You Were Here" as a single. There was nothing by then. They're not really the most, why not?
Aren't they? They're what we'd call concept albums. I mean, the whole thing about the Dark Side of the Moon specifically is it feels like it needs to be experienced in its entirety. Yeah. And basically, the people who went to see it in 1973 or whenever it was, that's what they expected. It was that double-sided sort of piece of an experience to dive into. It's a very different kind of music, really. The prog rock, I believe, it might even just about still fall. I mean, I'm sure they'd hate the label, but it seems to fall under that sort of general bracket.
We had a whole episode recently with Muffley about prog rock, because he's quite a fan of prog rock. Arnold Lane was a single that got to number 20, and See Emily Play got to number 6. And then I remember songs like "Careful with That Axe, Eugene,"
Is this the poetry years? Is this?
Well, this is sort of very late. I guess this is.
Oh right, okay.
I don't quite remember what point. I mean, Relics, I think, may just be Syd Barrett stuff.
It's just, again, because a lot of that comes from sort of poetry and performance poetry as well. There's a lot of that kind of lyricism in the early Floyd, and in storytelling. I mean, this is the whole thing, isn't it? You almost feel that the sense of the Who's rock opera sneaking in there as well. Is that sense of you're telling a story across the album, and I wonder, and that's what the Wall really does, isn't it?
I wonder if they did. I wonder if it was because Money from Dark Side of the Moon appears to have been a single in France and a number of other territories, but not in the UK, and a top 10 single. But why maybe they thought that those territories needed a single. Different
markets, I suppose. People. I mean, again, those sorts of albums were bought by certain sectors of the community. A lot of people didn't buy a Floyd album for the same reasons a lot of people did. There were some things were trendy and some things weren't, and to be honest, by the 80s, prog wasn't considered that trendy. People used to make jokes about Yes and make jokes about Pink Floyd, and yet they were, they still have their fans, and those albums now pretty much stood the test of time.
goodbye, goodbye. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.
Wow. Really? No kidding.
Thank you, darling. And you too. Bye-bye.
Oh, that sounded good.
This show is part of the Pride 48 network. Find more shows over at pride48.com.
Oh dear. What's going on now? Oh, it's the Shy Life Podcast. Let's go.
I have a voice. I have a voice.
You have a voice.
You have a voice. We have a voice.
We have a voice.
Unique voices in podcasting.
UnivazPods.net.
That is so cringe, oh my god. You're a man of culture as well.
I've listened to Dark Side of the Moon as a whole album. I haven't really listened to Wish You Were Here as a whole album, so I don't know.
Oh, it's a good experience. You should try it sometime.
Yeah. There's a song called Have a Cigar, which was a single in some territories and got to number 15 in one of them, but not the UK. And then suddenly, Another Brick in the Wall is number one everywhere.
It did come out of nowhere. I mean, it's kind of like hushed whispers, Floyd were talked about in school, but they weren't really an active one. It'd be like, there was like one lad who famously queued up to get his Genesis, wagged off to get his Genesis tickets and was roundly mocked by most of the rest of that year, but actually, I think from what I remember, people said that, when he was queuing up, he took the afternoon off to queue up for his Genesis tickets. Kate Bush came along and was chatting to them all. So who won that one, I think, was his general argument. Again, I may be getting stories mixed up there. But
well, of course, the only... I've told this story 101 times, but I'll tell it again. When I got taken to see a David Gilmour concert in the mid-noughties, turned out to be the one where David Bowie turned up as just singing two songs at the end, and which also turned out to be one of only about two things he ever did after his heart attack. And I really wasn't that keen on going to see David Gilmour. I just went because there was a spare ticket, and suddenly I woke up, and now it's one of the concerts I
know him. I know that bloke.
And my friend I was with, you should have seen his face just went. So he liked David Gilmour a lot, but even he was impressed that David Bowie was there. But,
they've had their fallings out, haven't they? I mean, that's as performers, they don't get on as much.
Later albums, which are just the David Gilmour ones, I suppose. It does seem to be that they would release a single from those later albums. They were never massively.
I seem to remember Dave Gilmour or Dave Gilmour's Pink Floyd, if you like, doing, was it Glastonbury a few years ago?
Yeah,
I just remember watching this concert that was them, and I don't know whether it was Glastonbury, because I don't know Glastonbury from anything, but I just remember them being on the telly late one evening doing this live show and thinking, God, that's impressive.
They do seem to have a non-album single called Hey, Hey, Rise Up, and that was released in 2022, featuring vocals by a Ukrainian singer, so whether that was partly as a sort of...
Save the Planet thing.
Yeah. But, yeah, I mean, they had a single called Take It Back from Division Bell, and it got to number 23. So, yeah.
Whether or not we like that particular kind of music, but the musicianship is phenomenal, and those iconic albums that they did do, they are timeless. I mean, I think people discover them and think they're the first person to ever hear them. I mean, is it Scissor Sisters?
They did Comfortably Numb. Yeah. I mean, and again, that sort of helped.
But you've got kids going, and you're going, oh, have you heard the original? And they're going, what?
Well, I mean, that's the trouble, though. Had they released Comfortably Numb as a single in 1980, maybe more people would know it. I certainly didn't know Comfortably Numb. That's from The Wall, isn't it? But
and in its original form, an incredible piece of work. But actually, the Scissor Sisters version is also very funky.
Yeah, that was definitely the first time that that I'd heard comforting them, so I never listened to The Wall. But I think with Pink Floyd, I was intrigued by the Syd Barrett stuff, and I think I might have even owned one or two of that. But
there's an early Floyd or Syd Barrett years or something CD, which is worth a listen. It's worth a go.
I think that might be the Relics one. It's got the bike. I like the bike. You can ride it if you like. Anyway, we're not going to sing.
That sounds very Yeti.
We're not going to sing this time. I promise you. And we've got no ick at the moment, so I think we should just. End there and yes.
Comfortably, numbly, and thinking about not having any pudding or whatever it is.
And next time we shall pick up at the very tail end of 79 and move into the new decade. But okay, well, goodbye again, and join us again soon. Thanks, Martin. Bye.
This is just the weirdest thing I've ever heard. Well, gotta tell you, I didn't expect that.
What the hell just happened on this show? I mean, seriously, reverse it, because I lost. What's going on? What happened?
Man, was that worth it or not? Oh my goodness, that was a darling little shoe. Whoa, I love that one. Great show, Paul. Yeah, that was a good shoe.
Thanks for my acoustic
Oi, oi, that's your lot. Oh, everyone's a critic.
Voila. You can always call me.
Never forget you. Okay, I'm back.
That's right.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Okay, stopping recording now.